And we're back, and today we're going to be talking about Yorgos Lanthimos' new film, The Favorite. Favorite's getting a lot of attention right now, and it's getting a wider release. And after wanting to see it all of 2018, I finally got to see it over the last few days, and I'll tell you what, it was one of my favorites.
I don't know what to say.
If you're like me and you watch any modicum of television, you've undoubtedly seen about 1 million TV spots for The Favorite. It's getting a lot of attention, and rightfully so. Yorgos Lanthimos is a prolific director, having made The Lobster and Killing of a Sacred Deer. A lot of people that I know who I don't even think are into independent films or unconventional movies are huge fans of his, unbeknownst to me. And talking to them about this movie, I saw just how popular this guy's becoming as he's getting his name out there, and he's only in his early 40s. And it's nice to see a director on an asymptotic rise as they're going about developing their career, their style, and their look. And The Favorite's no different. This film stars Olivia Colman, Emma Stone, and Rachel Weisz, three fantastic actresses who are all being recognized, and rightfully so, for their performances in this film. But what's the movie about? Well, you're going from The Lobster, which is a film about a world in which people who don't enter into relationships get turned into animals. So it's a pretty strange turn to then go into a love story involving Queen Anne and two cousins seeking her attention. But that's what this film's about, and believe it or not, in many ways, it's just as strange as The Lobster. The film begins with Emma Stone arriving at the palace of Queen Anne. Emma Stone has fallen on hard times. Once a lady of England, she is now just an ordinary person, and she's returning to the castle to find her cousin, Rachel Weisz, who is essentially the second-hand woman for Queen Anne. Rachel Weisz takes little sympathy on Emma Stone and essentially brings her back into the castle, but as a lowly servant. From there, Emma Stone begins a slow and methodical rise to the favor of the Queen in hopes of regaining her status and overcoming her cousin, who is sort of this overbearing Machiavellian type of character. And as you watch these two characters feud over the attention of Queen Anne, played by Olivia Colman, you really see an interesting script that's very unconventional. At times, especially in the beginning, it felt very Aaron Sorkinian. It felt very witty. The dialogue was very fast-paced. It was very interesting. And it really betrayed who those characters were meant to be. It told you a lot about who they are at their core. Rachel Weisz is cold and she acts very mechanically. For the first half, she really is just a machine, just nailing these roles with this cold, bitter, sardonic nature, something that really just is evocative of the power that she wields. And Olivia Colman is a character who, at many times, despite being the queen, is sort of lost and sad and at times pathetic and at times eccentric and outraged. But everything is consistent to her and unique to her. In other words, the script has these really unique individual characters with really unique and individual voices. And that's a very powerful thing. Sometimes, I mentioned Aaron Sorkin. Many Aaron Sorkin characters sound identical, and it's because at times Aaron Sorkin just writes how Aaron Sorkin thinks. But in this script, every character really stands apart. Emma Stone has a dynamic range from playing up from a position of weakness and being secretly this incredibly strong and cunning individual. Rachel Weisz is what appears to be, this iron lady who is sometimes just as lost as the queen she serves. And Olivia Colman's just a fucking mess. But what's funny about this script is it does have the ability to jump back and forth between Aaron Sorkin and almost a Machiavellian invocation of the prince. It is this really interesting kind of scheme-based plot of a film. And watching these characters develop, you don't feel like these characters change so much as reveal who they are. And sometimes that is the most interesting arc for a character to undergo. And while the acting is getting a lot of the attention for this film, and while the script, rightfully so, is also getting a lot of attention, it's an interesting point that Joe and I discussed when we were talking about the Academy Awards, and how realistically, if 3 of your top actresses are nominated for acting awards, if your costume design, your sets, if your script, if everything involved with the movie that is also being nominated for Best Picture is nominated, that is an example of great direction. Because again, it takes a village and it's someone who can really organize all of that. And at the end of the day, while I could talk for hours about what makes a great performance, and you see a lot of those, and in fact, Nicholas Hoult is probably one of the most memorable characters of the film, and I wouldn't even say he's one of the top 3 performances in this film. He's just fantastic in his own right. And the depth of greatness in this movie is really a credit to Yorgos Lanthimos. And I mentioned earlier about Yorgos Lanthimos and how great it is to watch a director on this asymptotic rise. It's great not because you get to partake in all these great movies and these great projects, but it's great because you really see a director who can have his own vision and his own imprint on Hollywood and film in general. You know, Martin Scorsese isn't just great because he made several good movies. He's great because he has his own visual style. And I find that as we enter this age of digital film, a lot of directors are looking the same, feeling the same. The way that things are shot make it feel very homogenized. And style is becoming so much more important in really showcasing how a director perceives the art form. And talking about this, what I really want to highlight for this movie is it is a film with amazing makeup and sets and costuming and fantastic acting. And sometimes when everything is so perfect and resplendent and it is really transported to a time and place, amazing over-the-top camera work can really pull you out of it. And what Lanthimos does that's so interesting in this is he breaks a lot of convention when it comes to cinematography. If it makes any sense, it's a lot of shots that are medium shots where everybody is in the center of the frame. It's not utilizing a lot of rule of thirds. What the centerpiece of the shot is meant to be is literally positioned at the center. So when two characters join hands, that symbolic moment is one of the few times where a person's not at the center, but two hands are. Everything that you're meant to be following is centered. And that's a really interesting thing because you're typically not supposed to do that in cinematography. But when you master the rules, is it really saying that you always abide by them or you know the right times to break them for effect? And in that sense, Lanthimos' cinematography is very punk rock. There's a lot of really cool and interesting shots that are interesting and useful and that really grab you because of their simplicity. And what that allows the rest of the film to do is speak for itself. It allows the characters to really be the center of attention. It allows for you to just enjoy what you're seeing. And at times, that really interesting aesthetic that he shows in other films does pop out in what seem like weird little decisions. The incorporation, for instance, of a fisheye lens at times. And for those that don't know, a fisheye lens is, if you think of like a GoPro, how everything looks kind of warped around the edges, it's because a lens with a wider range, you begin to kind of warp around the outside. It just sees really broad, and you get that kind of weird, warbly fisheye effect. And in a film that is so classical and is set in this time and place and feels very authentic to that period, the inclusion of a fisheye lens, occasionally in big rooms where you don't necessarily need it, is very jarring. And there are moments where that fisheye lens is used to great effect. If it's a really small room and you're trying to fit a lot into a small space, you have to have that kind of wider angle. But for the most part, it's a film that is almost painfully unconventional in how basic it is. And it works. It works fantastically well. There are certain sequences, like for instance, when Rachel Weisz is dancing, where it's just a series of straight-on medium shots in a corridor. I mean, you can't get much more basic, and yet it really puts you there in this awkward moment that's supposed to be uncomfortable. It's a really good example of how cinematography and the use of visuals can transport you almost as much as every other piece of Hollywood magic: the makeup, the set, the acting. And the cinematography is such that while everything is so resplendent, it doesn't push the film over the top. And I feel that sometimes I don't like movies set in that time and place because it's just too much. Everything is too pretty, too gorgeous, and it feels too produced. And it's the difference between a film like an Amadeus and an Elizabeth. You know, you've got these different films that are set in similar time periods, but they know their strengths, they play to them, and sometimes you just got to capture the moment. You don't have to create the moment behind the camera. So for this film, absolutely, I think that people should see it. I think that if you are expecting, your sort of draconian, period piece dealing, if you're expecting like a Downton Abbey kind of deal and you're not really into that, don't worry. It's not that kind of movie. I was in the mood for kind of anything when I went to go see it. My mind was open, but it was still not anything I could have really anticipated. It's part comedy, part romance, part tragedy, but it's always entertaining. And so if you get the chance, I would go out and see The Favorite. And before I leave, if you think that I'm not pronouncing Yorgos Lanthimos correctly, at least be happy in the fact that I know that he's Greek and I'm not calling him Dutch. Thank you very much, and I'm going to leave before I push my luck. Yorgos!